Hello, my fellow UX designers and user researchers. In today's session, I would like to talk about feedback in the design process. If you're working as a UX designer, you have probably been part of many, or at least some, UX critique sessions where you present your design solutions and you're collecting feedback from either other stakeholders or your team members. And those sessions might not have gone as planned or as wished. Maybe you didn't get the feedback that you were looking for, or the discussions got sidetracked, or the feedback wasn't as helpful or valuable to you. So today I want to talk about some tips and insights of how to create better feedback sessions. And I want to discuss feedback sessions in person, but then also feedback sessions that are remote and especially asynchronous. And then some tips around how to give feedback and how to receive feedback. Let's dive in. So the first topic, in-person feedback session. So if you want to prepare an in-person feedback session, here's some tips on how to structure a good session so that you get the most out of it. First of all, be very clear about who needs to be there. And that kind of depends on where you are in your design process and what you're looking for. Do you need to get feedback on the solution that you have in terms of validation? Then you might actually be at a point where you need to talk to users rather than in-house. Or are you stuck with your solutions and you feel like, well, I have something, but I'm not quite sure if this is, the best solution that I could come up with, and you're looking for more ideas? Then it might be a good time to meet other design team members and have feedback sessions and brainstorming. Or are you at a point where you need to move the project forward and you need to get an alignment overall from your stakeholders, or you need to get sign-off? Well, then you need to invite your stakeholders to a feedback session. And to that point, to be very efficient there as well, you need to be clear on who from the stakeholder side should be invited or involved in your feedback session. A very helpful tool for that is the RACI matrix, which you should use at the beginning of a project anyways to get a good understanding of who of your stakeholders is responsible or actionable, needs to be informed. So who are the people that you actually need to invite when it comes to decision making, and who is, the final people who needs to be informed for the final sign-off that you need to create. So be very clear about the participants that you need. Then once you set up your session, you also want to be very clear about the outcome. What do you need to get out of the session to continue your work? What is the ideal outcome? What do you need the team to focus on, and what do you not want them to focus on? So be very clear about that before you even start a feedback session, because that will kind of define on, who you're inviting, but also how you set up the session. But this is also something that is really important to share right at the beginning of your feedback session. You could start it by, for example, if you're looking for input for ideas, you could explain to your team, hey, listen, I have been working on this for a while and I came up with some solutions, and those solutions are decent. Maybe you did some testing already, but I feel like they could still be improved and it could still be simpler, but I'm a little bit stuck. So in today's session, I would really like to get more ideas and to get me unstuck to move forward with this design iterations. Or if you're looking for sign off from your stakeholders, like be very clear there as well. It's like, we have been working on these solutions. Those solutions have been tested. We're very confident about our solutions. But in today's session, we would like to get a final alignment from the team, making sure that we didn't miss any other goals or criteria, and move the project forward so we can have the development team starting to work on their piece. So be very clear about what you want to get out of the session so everybody knows how to spend the time the most. Next, introduce the process. So you have your team there, you're starting a session. Be very clear about how you want to collect feedback. Do you want to present everything first and then have people asking questions or giving feedback, or can they interrupt you while you're presenting? Do you want everybody to go around in circles and get feedback from everyone, or should people just jump in individually, maybe raising their hands? Do you want to get feedback silently or openly? Like, should people just write their feedback first on sticky notes? Also, remind them again on what to focus on. And if you feel that this is a group that is not very familiar with design critique and design feedback, you might even want to give them some elements that they should focus on. So just, again, remind them on the overall purpose of the problem and the solution. So, for example, remember that our goal is with this design solution to create something that is super, super simple for our users. So in your feedback, keep that in mind and focus on the simplicity of the solution. Or remember that we have a wide variety of groups, and part of our DNA as a business is to make sure that we follow all the accessibility criteria. So if you see any aspects here, like, keep that in mind for your feedback session. Then before you start presenting a solution, you should make sure that your audience has the context and is up to speed to where you are in your head and your thinking, right? So introduce your audience to the problem and solution journey, to describe the problem that you're trying to solve, and share any kind of insights that you have, like any data or user feedback that also helps as an argument for your solutions that you came up with. Maybe there are certain restrictions, certain requirements that you had to design in. But keep it short and precise. So this is not about a research feedback session or a research outcome presentation, but give your audience enough information to kind of create a box, a frame of where they should and can provide feedback. Then for your actually presentation, just make sure that you're, again, like, taking your audience on a journey. So present your design solutions best from a user perspective. Describe a little story, maybe even current pain points, and then how is the solution being so much better and solving current pain points. So these are some tips for in-person presentation or design critique sessions. But what if you are collecting feedback remotely, and not just remotely, but asynchronously? This happens a lot, and I find myself very often in situations where we have teams distributed all over, and especially with using tools like Figma, where it is so easy to leave comments. So anybody who has access to your files, your designers, your developers, and other stakeholders, they can just go in and leave feedback. So how do you make sure at that point that you get feedback that is actually valuable for you and is moving the overall process forward? So I find using tools like Figma or any tools that allow for asynchronous feedback can be like big time savers. They can be amazing, but they also need to be introduced. So before you use any of those tools, make sure that you explain the process. So I usually start my project with an introduction where I have my first feedback session in person, and I present wireframes, design outcomes, and explain everybody, okay, this is what we're doing. Maybe I do it after the end of introducing my designs, and then I can explain to the team, so this is what we're doing from now on. We're using this tool, it might be Figma, it might be something else, for collecting feedback. And then I give a little demo. So see, if you click up here in that corner over there, there's a little communication icon. And if you click there, you can leave comments wherever you click on. So have a little walkthrough and explain to people how to use tools and where you collect feedback. But then also be very clear about the rules. So what are you looking to get feedback on, and what are you not looking to get feedback on? So it's important for stakeholders too to be reminded about the process that, for example, you are only working in wireframes and these wireframes won't contain the final content, or they don't have the final design elements. It's not the right font, it's not the right font size. So be very specific about what you don't want to get feedback on and also what you want to get feedback on. And I try to repeat those rules or the specific focus with every iteration or invitation that I send out to collect feedback. Another important impact or aspect and strategy I find to make asynchronous feedback work is communicating the intention. I do this usually by collecting or recording a quick Loom video or walkthrough video, just like I'm doing here, where I have like ideally a very short time frame of like 5 minutes or like a couple of minutes where I walk them through the core designs. And I make sure that I describe, again, the overall problem that we're trying to solve, the user situation, and the solution. And I try to give rationales in that little walkthrough as well of why I came up with those solutions, and then end at the very end with specific questions that I would like to get feedback on. So that will help as a reminder, first of all, to set the scene and to reduce the amount of interpretations that people can have when they're just opening up a Figma file and looking at some wireframes, because everybody sees different things. But it also reminds everybody on what it is that we're trying to solve for and what it is that we as a team need to focus on. So I hope these tips can help you, like in combination with what you learned about in-person design critique sessions. I hope these tips will help you for the asynchronous feedback sessions. What, though, if you are in the role of giving feedback? So you might be in the design team and your fellow design team member is having a design critique session. Or you're the one who's facilitating the session. So one thing, if you are in the role of giving feedback, one thing to always remind yourself is making sure that you actually fully understand what the other person is trying to communicate. And it comes very much from the user research strategy of active listening. To make sure that you're clarifying any kind of misunderstandings or things that you are not very clear about. So clarify the problem about the user pain points. You could ask questions around, hey, do we have any data points on X, Y, and Z? Maybe there are aspects that just popped up in your mind while you were looking on the design solution that nobody has thought about before either. So just ask questions, clarify the solutions, the design solutions if necessary. So things like, could you explain to me why you decided to go this way and went with this solution? Don't try to introduce a solution right away, but really focus on asking questions first before you communicate your feedback. And then if you are giving feedback, also always make sure that you focus on the design. Like, this is not about a person and the skill sets of a person, but it's really about the bigger picture of we're trying to solve something here and we're all in this together. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and how is the solution helping or not helping with that problem? So phrase your critique always design specific as well. Then the feedback that you give I know this can be sometimes hard. Like sometimes we only have certain feelings. It's like, I look at it, but it kind of feels complicated to me, or it kind of feels not right to me. But try to verbalize as much as possible why you think something is not fitting, is not right, or is complicated. And then potentially layer on there how it could be improved if you see something. But yeah, so don't just start with a solution without going through the what and the why. And don't just stop at the thing that you don't like, but try to be more specific about why you don't like something. Very important too, leave room. So there is a designer who spent a lot of time coming up with these solutions. Don't just jump in there and offer a counter solution, but ideally provide several options. Or again, go back to the question tactic of like, okay, I see that this is your solution. Have you ever considered doing it this way or that way? Or come up with examples. Oh, this reminded me totally on the experience that I just had recently, and they did it this way. What if we have a combination or have something that goes along these lines or those lines or these lines? But make sure that you're not just providing a critique in terms of you need to change that, but still leave the decision making and the ownership at the designer. Unless, obviously, it is something that really needs to change. Like you have the wrong logo there, or there's a misspelling. Both of these examples, by the way, are not great examples for wireframe critique sessions because that should really not be the center focus. Then also acknowledge the good. So while you're giving feedback, and the feedback should always be focused on growth, like making a solution better, but also making a person better. So acknowledge also the good. There, again, went a lot of time into creating something. So mention anything that's positive, but also encouraging for the designer to keep growing. So what if you're on the other side and you're receiving feedback? What are some things that you could do to make feedback more effective for you and useful? So first of all, as from the other side, who should start with asking a lot of questions, you receiving feedback should actually start with listening. So just sit down there, and this can be sometimes very hard because, this is my baby. I put a lot of time in there and I designed something and I'm convinced about this design, but just take the time, listen, and just take notes. You don't have to respond to anything right away. You can, but you don't have to. And if there is any feedback that makes you think, just say that. Just appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much. And I will think about it. Don't expect or put the pressure on you that you have to come up with a solution right then and there. And I would also argue that if you're the designer, you should help the team to see that unless there is that time pressure and you actually have to come up with a final solution right then and there, the purpose of the feedback is usually not to get a solution right then and there. Good design takes time. So it's often worthwhile to just collect a lot of inputs and information and then step back, take some time, consider all your inputs that you got, and, do it again. Come up with ideas for solutions. And most importantly, don't take it personally. So you don't have to react to any of the feedback, but you can. And one of the reactions would be, a good reaction would be to ask any kind of clarifying questions. So if there's feedback that's coming along that you don't really understand, just ask back and make sure that you get it right. And overall, you are the one who's taking away the feedback and has to work on it. So use the skill set of active listening, really use the listening, but then also validating, making sure that you understood what people were trying to share with you. Another aspect of you don't have to respond to any feedback, but you can. You should not be defensive, but you can provide arguments when helpful. So if you receive feedback around an interaction or a design element where you get a sense that maybe I was just not clear about how this actually works, and people have a certain interpretation, but it was a different interpretation than what my intention was. This is when you can provide clarifying input, or you can also provide arguments, if you have them, that are data backed, and it's like, I totally see what you're saying with the alternative solution. We tested this actually with users and tested 2 different versions, and this is the versions that performed better. So provide arguments where helpful. And then lastly, thank everybody for feedback, because feedback will help you grow. And actually now lastly, use the feedback and review the feedback for personal growth. So you can take feedback, obviously to work in your design solution, but you can also review feedback, and that is usually done more at the end of a project overall, where you can just collect inputs and insights on how you can grow as a designer. So what areas did you get repeatedly feedback on? Were there any kind of blind spots, any things that you missed, anything that you under addressed in your design? Like, these might be areas for growth. Or where did you receive a lot of positive feedback on? Like, maybe there are certain areas that you always nail it, and this is your superpower. Also, what kind of feedback is really hard for you to take on? And what critique style do you like or dislike? So just keep reflecting, especially at the end of a project, to learn about yourself and how to improve with feedback. The very last topic that I want to tackle is, how do we actually track feedback, or what do we do with feedback as designers? So one helpful aspect I find is when I receive feedback, I'm going to assess the feedback. And I usually do the assessment after the session and not right away in there. So first of all, assessing the quality of the feedback. So is that feedback that is helpful to you and the design that you're working on, or is that kind of like out of scope? And then the type of feedback that you get, is that feedback that you can take action on? Like, you can actually create design updates, you're totally aligned with that feedback? Or is that feedback where you felt like, I disagree with the feedback that I was provided with, but I guess I just need to do a little bit more research and collect more data to back up my solution and to persuade the team that this is actually a good solution? Or is there any feedback where you felt like, this feedback is actually not super clear, or I wasn't super clear, and rather than moving into design updates, I just need to make something clearer. So this could mean, so that actually is more of a design update. Maybe I don't know, you had a little filter icon, but that filter icon was not identified clearly as a filter icon. So people were missing the interaction element of having a filter in there. So you just need to make something clearer. Or maybe the interaction itself was not clearly understood. So you have to communicate that better. It can sometimes result into design updates. It can also sometimes result in just annotations and clarifications. Then you should also take that feedback back then and make sure that your audience knows that you responded to the feedback. So indicate what has changed and why something has changed. In Figma, there are certain ways where you can like leave counter comments or mark something as completed. But also make sure that you are clearly identifying if something not being tackled and why something is not being tackled. So this could be maybe comments around missing coloring, where you just make it very clear coloring is not part of the wireframe process. And then keeping track of feedback. So I find this really depends on the team and the complexity and maybe also sensitivity of the overall design and decision-making process. In the majority of the projects, I don't keep an extra record. So Figma they capture all the comments and they have a history. So that's a good way to like track your feedback. I also make sure that if there is a decision about removing a version or I had multiple versions, that I always have an archive where I can go back and I see the history and I can pull it back up. But I also had complex projects where, especially when it went on over a longer time, where after a while, decision making was almost going back and forth. So there was a decision to remove a certain feature, but then after a couple of weeks, the decision was to add a certain feature. And if that happens over and over, it's actually a good idea to have a proper log where you log the decision that you're making, why you're making the decision, and what you're removing or adding, just so you can go back and pull up helpful arguments of, we tried this version and we tested this version, and because it didn't work or didn't perform very well, we all agreed that we would remove a certain aspect. So that, just to keep in mind, depending on the complexity, you might actually try to think about setting a specific record up. I don't have a specific tool that I recommend. I know that there are certain tools out there. When I dealt the last time with the complexity of project, I actually just used a spreadsheet in Google and kept track of it. It's work, but it was also worth it. And that brings me to the last item here. So sometimes it can be helpful to set up kind of like an icebox or a cooler. So I see that very often in especially asynchronous feedback that I get on wireframes, that there are topics that are being criticized that are not part of the UX design process, but might be very, very relevant for the developers or the visual designer. So I will make sure that those comments are being kept and are also being shared with the relevant person who needs to hear about that feedback. And again, there might be different setups or tools, processes that you want to use for that. Maybe it results in a Jira ticket and it's assigned to the specific person. But it's always a good idea to capture any kind of feedback and make sure that it lands somewhere where it is helpful and can be actioned on by the person who is actually responsible for it. And that was it. These were tips around providing and collecting feedback in the design process. I hope that was helpful. Have fun in your next design critique session.